around in here. I can hear them.
Good morning, Chairman.
Good morning. Welcome to the virtual meeting of the Overview and Scrutiny Management Board. My name's Councillor Robert Parker and I'm the Chairman of the Board. Can I welcome all members and officers in attendance today? The audio feed of this meeting is being broadcast by the County Council's website, and I'd also like to welcome members of the press and public who are listening to our meeting online today. Anyone invited to speak during today's meeting should unmute their microphone and switch on their camera. Could you turn off your camera and microphone when not participating? We will today be conducting a roll call voting for the minutes and the pre-decision scrutiny item, which are agenda items 3 and 8. The rest will be agreed by dissent using the chat function. If you wish to speak, please use the chat function and type speak as a comment. All officers and members are welcome to use the chat function, and requests to speak will be collated by the Vice Chair, Councillor Ray Wotton. Nigel West, Head of Democratic Services and Statutory Scrutiny Officer, will indicate in the chat when a new item has begun. If you do experience any IT issues during the meeting, can you end the call using the red phone icon and rejoin the meeting using the link previously provided? If you do experience connectivity issues while speaking, can you turn off your camera, as this may help? If you continue to experience IT issues, then as usual, can you contact Simon Firth, our IT engineer, for assistance? Can I also ask that members who are intending to leave the meeting or are returning to the meeting indicate using the chat functions? Officers don't need to do so. Can we now move to the order of proceedings for today's meeting? And could I begin by asking Nick Harrison, Democratic Services Officer, to confirm the presence of all members in attendance at the meeting. Nick will invite each member in the following order to indicate their attendance. Could you please indicate your presence? Thank you. Nick.
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Ray Wotton.
Present.
Councillor Mrs. Boquet.
Present.
Councillor Mrs. Brockway.
Present.
Councillor Kendrick.
Present.
Councillor Macy.
Present.
Councillor Marfleet.
Present.
Councillor Mrs. Newton. Councillor Pepper.
Present.
Councillor Rowe.
Present.
Councillor Strangle.
Councillor Strangle has to unexpectedly send his apologies.
Okay, thank you. And then added members, Mrs. Machin. Ms. Sayer. Apologies from Philip Johnson. And councillors not members of the committee, I notice Councillor Whittington is in attendance. I can't see any attendance from anybody else. And we've got a note from the Chief Exec, Debbie Barnes, and the leader, Councillor Hill, that they're in another meeting, but they'll join as soon as possible.
And Councillor Davey is in attendance also.
Okay, thank you. That's
Fine.
it. Thanks, Chairman.
That's it. Great, thank you. Good start. Okay, apologies for absence. Item 1 on the agenda.
So we've got apologies from Councillor Adams. Councillor Rowe is deputising Philip Johnson. And also, as we've heard, we've got apologies from Councillor Strangle.
Okay, I also understand.
And also, sorry, Councillor Linda Wotton is in attendance for the item on developer contributions.
Thank you very much. I also understand that Andrew Crookham, who's the Executive Director for Resources, has sent his apologies. And as we've just indicated, there's a clash of meetings. There is a local outbreak engagement board meeting, which Councillor Martin Hill, Debbie Barnes and Michelle Andrews will be attending and will be joining us when that meeting's finished. Okay, so that's dealt with item 1, which is apologies for absence. Declarations of members' interests. If any member would like to declare an interest, can you please indicate in the chat now by typing speak? That's in relation to any interest that a councillor may have with any items on today's agenda. Okay, Councillor Wotton, do we have any members who've declared an interest in the chat box?
None recorded, Chairman.
Okay. Fine, that's dealt with item 2, declarations of councillors' interest. If we now move to item 3, which are the minutes of the meeting of the Overview and Scrutiny Management Board, our last meeting, which was held on the 25th of February. This item is for me to confirm and sign the minutes after there's been any agreement, saying that this is a true record. So I'll go through the minutes of the last meeting. It starts on page 5. If anybody wants to make a comment about accuracy alone, then please indicate. So we start with page 5, go to page 6, page 7, page 8, page 9, page 10, page 11, page 12, page 13, page 14. Thank you. Did we have any indication, Councillor Wootton, as to whether anybody wanted to comment?
None recorded at all, Chairman. I'm happy to propose that they are a true record of the meeting held on the 25th of February.
Thank
I'm
you.
happy to second those, Chairman. Councillor Macy.
That's kind of you, Carl. Thank you. So we've got a proposer and a seconder for the minutes, which we now need to vote on. So, as usual, we're voting on whether you agree that they're correct.
Thank you. Councillor Mrs. Bowcat.
I was absent at the last meeting, so I'll have to abstain.
Thank you. Councillor Mrs. Brockway.
4,
Councillor Kendrick.
4,
Councillor Macy.
4.
Councillor Marfleet.
4.
Councillor Mrs. Newton. Councillor Parker.
4.
Councillor Pepper.
4,
Councillor Ray Wootton.
4,
Mrs. Machin. Councillor Rowe.
4.
Thank you. That's carried, Chairman.
I'll sign those after the meeting. Okay, so we now move to, announcements by myself as chair, executive councillors and chief officers. I've got a few things to say. First of all, I want to report that I attended the meeting of the executive on the 2nd of March and presented our comments from the board on the revenue and capital budget monitoring reports and also the performance report for quarter 3 in relation to our management of that particular item. I mentioned our concerns with the Fix My Street app, and it was highlighted that work was continuing on aligning the coding used by the council system to the coding used by Fix My Street, so as to improve the quality of information available to the public, but also that a new app would be made available to councillors over the coming months with specific information on highway repairs and similar activities in their local division. And also in relation to the capital budget monitoring report, I mentioned our point about the role of scrutiny committees in monitoring substantial capital schemes. The leader of the council, Martin Hill, highlighted that he looked forward to the involvement of scrutiny committees in monitoring large capital schemes in the new council term, and that future reports to the board and executive would identify where and when schemes had been previously reported to the relevant scrutiny committee. In relation to the councillor call for action that you will remember that we had from Councillor Wootton, which we considered at our January meeting, I can say that the Highways and Transport Scrutiny Committee agreed at its meeting on the 8th of March that further investigation was required on this matter and has requested more information be presented to them at a future meeting. The Environment and Economy Scrutiny Committee has identified farming and support to farmers as a possible topic for a scrutiny review. The committee set up a working group to identify the key lines of inquiry for including in the scoping for a potential review, and the scoping will be considered by this OSMB board after the May elections. This will be the last meeting of our board, as you know, before we go and do other things. And we're not going to have a meeting in April due to the close proximity to the May elections. I just want to finish by saying I'd like to take the opportunity personally of thanking all the members of the board for their contribution over the last 4 years. I would have particularly liked to personally thank our added members, but I'm not sure if any of them are present, for their contribution, given the fact that they voluntarily come to this process on an unpaid basis. That's Megan Machin, Alex Sayer, and the Revenue Philip Johnson. And if they're not present, then at least for the record, I'd like my thanks to their work and to all the members of the OSMB, and indeed to officers who over 4 years have given us sterling support, advice, guidance, and tried to keep us on the straight and narrow. So that's my the end of my personal contributions. If we move on now to Executive Councillor announcements, if there are any, are there any Executive Councillor announcements, for example, from Mark Whittington on behalf of Martin Hill, or indeed from Councillor Colin Davey?
Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I've got nothing to report from either Martin or myself. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Yeah, Colin, do you want to say anything?
I'll comment on the paper when we get to it, Chairman, but there's nothing further I'd like to add at this moment in time. But if you think
the other Executive Councillor that usually attends our meeting, Councillor Barry Young, is Councillor Young present? No. Is that right?
So, Chairman.
Okay. Right. Moving on. Any chief officers announcements? I know that Debbie Barnes is absent for the moment, but James, is there anything you want to say on behalf of either yourself or any other chief officer?
No, nothing to raise at all at this stage, Chairman. Thank you.
Okay, that's fine. So that's dealt with announcements. Okay, so if we move then on to item 5, which is consideration of call-ins. Councillor, any notification of call-ins?
No call-ins, Chairman.
Thank you. Moving on, item 6, consideration of councillors' calls for action. Nick, have we received any councillor calls for action?
No calls for action, Chairman.
Okay, so we now move on to substantive part of our agenda in the sense of policy issues that we have to scrutinise. The first one is at item 7, which is the developer contribution scrutiny review. Remember that came before us in relation to developer contribution. We now have the executive response and an action plan. So I'd like to invite Justin Brown, Assistant Director Growth, to present the report. I'm sure that Councillor Colin Davey will be joining in the debate later, but if we can have the report in the first place from Justin. Over to you, Justin.
Chairman, thank you. So since Councillor Mrs Wotton and I brought the recommendations from the scrutiny review to you, my team have subsequently met with a number of executive councillors and held 2 meetings with councillors Davey and Poll to take forward the recommendations. You will see from the report that the executive councillors have agreed to all the recommendations, but I would encourage members to look at page 16 of the report, because I think that's the one which gives us perhaps the flavour of their ambition and response. And I guess what councillors Davey and Poll wanted us to do was to recognise that place shaping and place leadership is a partnership between developers, the local planning authority, the county council, and indeed communities. And therefore, they wanted us as a group of officers to provide real clarity and to be assertive And by assertive, I don't mean negative or aggressive. I mean clear and easy to understand in terms of the advice and place shaping that we would offer to the development process. And taking the recommendations of the scrutiny review and the discussion with Councillors Davey and Poll, I think we've agreed that the action plan actions should all remain, and it's more about the how would we do it, as set out in page 16. So the idea would be a leadership statement, which is very clear about the County Council's ambitions for place and to help both developers and local planning authorities understand what we wish. We believe that we need to make a commitment to improve and strengthen the way that all departments across the council advise on the cumulative effect of development. So improving the informed analysis of development, having a strategy for securing developer contributions, which is clear, as I say, assertive. It sets out what it is we believe the community needs and requires. Stronger communication, and in the report you'll say that I'm suggesting we use expressions like "we do not support," things like that, which help to make very clear the council's position. Also in communication, a commitment to liaise with local members in advance of any policy positions being taken for individual developments. And finally, a commitment around transparency in terms of the way that we will publish the council's responses to planning authorities on our website. So those are, if you like, the hows of the way we intend to take the action plan forward. And I note that part of your discussions will be about how you monitor and scrutinise progress against the action plan. And I would suggest that it will probably take best part of 6 months for us to put a new style and a new way of operating in place. So September might be a useful point in which you scrutinise progress so far. And you'll remember from when we spoke about the report before that one of the specific actions is the production of an annual statement about developer contributions. That statement needs to be produced by the 31st of December each year, and therefore it might make sense to look at the outcomes of what this new approach offers in January. So I will pause there, Councillor Parker. I don't know whether Councillor Davey or Councillor Mrs Wootton have any further comments they would want to make.
Okay, let's start with Councillor Davey. Colin, your thoughts?
Thank you very much, Chairman, for that. And I think Justin has adequately and comprehensively covered our views from the executive on this. I think it would be helpful, Chairman, if I come in at the end of the debate on this and then add any further comments. But I think we have real ambition on the place shaping agenda for the county of Lincolnshire, and I think this response to this scrutiny work sets that out in clear detail, and I will be very keen that the new council and this body and the scrutiny process monitors this and make sure we're delivering on our ambition for Lincolnshire. So thank you, Chairman. Happy to come in at the end of the debate.
You're welcome. Thank you, Colin. Councillor Wootton, Linda, as the leader of the scrutiny review, how do you feel about the executive response to your work?
Good morning, Chairman. I'm very happy with this paper that's been produced. We've been listened to. It was an interesting piece of work. I can see the executive have put an extensive amount of thought from where we left things, and I'm really happy with what they've come up with. They're taking up the leadership, and hopefully going forward there'll be bigger partnership between the district councils, the parish councils, because also, the fact that you're going to publish things on our website would be a great asset, because members of the public out there do not understand the different levels of council. And as you go on, I think probably Justin or Colling's going to go further into the recommendations. I accept all the responses. I think it's been an important piece of work, and it's something to look forward to in the future, in particular the training for councillors. I was quite fortunate on the committee that I'd worked under Section 38.278, so I had some understanding of infrastructure for highways, etc. And other members like Councillor Rowe came up with some information on a sill that I didn't know about. So it's been a really interesting piece of work and very productive. So I'm quite happy, Chairman. I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Okay. If I could just ask you a question in relation to, I'll use page 19, where it's laid out very clearly and explicitly. So if we take recommendation 3, it talks about recommendation accepted, yes, initial response, an alternative version, and then action, another alternative version. From what you've said, you're comfortable with these, what we might call alternative versions?
Yes, I am, Chairman. Yes.
Okay, that's good. Okay, Councillor Ray-Wharton, have we got any speakers at the moment?
None at the moment, no, but I do have a note from Councillor Barry Young, who will join us at item agenda 12.
Okay, thank you. If we've got no speakers at the moment, the point that was made by Justin about review is important, because we've got this paper and some things are going to happen between March and the projected first review in September 2021. It was implicit in what you said, Justin, that this comes back to OSMB. I wonder whether members have got a view about whether OSMB is the most appropriate of the locations, or whether or not the detailed work of analysis of this could go to what the scrutiny committee that's most, what we might call, typically located with potentially economy and environment. And I wondered if members have got a thought about whether this is so strategic that it perhaps ought to be with OSMB, or whether it's about handling it at a different level, but where expertise may be important. Any thoughts?
Chairman, I do have a speaker, Councillor Stephen Rowe, wishes to speak.
That's lovely. Councillor Rowe, Steve.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The things that struck me about the review was that councillors that hadn't been on parish councils or district councils or not heavily involved in planning didn't have an understanding of what the contributions were, 106 SIL, how they worked, the levels of money that would be going to town and parish councils. And I think that if we could look for the new council to include that in the training, so as people understood that side, would be very good. And also, the other thing that I was a little concerned about, although I'm not now, was with regard to following the money and seeing that the money was claimed, and where there are occasions where the money wasn't used for the initial reason, for one reason or another, it was able to be diverted in another direction. And I think that's quite important, that there's a flexibility within what the money's asked for to do. But otherwise, yeah, I think it was a good report and a good response. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that point that you've made is really, really important, because in a sense, we can do all the monitoring we like about looking at whether this is being put into action. But in practical terms, we need to get benefits out of it, and we need to report those benefits and to share them with our community, because often developments do come with what we might call a negative aspect. And if there's been what we might call a compensating benefit, then that goes a long way to making people feel better about a process that they thought might be difficult for their area when they see the reward that comes with the Section 106 payment. Okay, so
Chairman, I have another speaker, Councillor Wendy Boquet.
That's lovely. Wendy.
Thank you, Councillor Parker. I just, excuse me, I just think it's really good. The action plan, being on a district where we have lots of building of housing in, I wouldn't say inappropriate places, but we've got large schemes coming in smaller villages and towns. I do think this is really good, and the more emphasis that we can put on to encourage house building in appropriate places with the right highways, road structures, health services, I just think anything to that can be good. So I really commend this paper coming through. Thank you.
That's lovely. Okay, thank you. Right, are there any other speakers, Ray?
No further speakers, Chairman.
Okay, but I'll make one comment. I've made the point about should it come to OSMB for the timescale review in September. In the absence, yes, sure, Colin, I'll let you come in last. In the absence of any bid from any other scrutiny committee, then we'll put it on the agenda for our meeting for OSMB in September. Final word, Colin.
Thanks, Chairman. Just wanted to pick up Stephen Rowe's comments. I agree, training is necessary, I think, and that's something I strongly support. I think the better informed members are about how all these processes work, the better role that they can play in bridging the divides between parish, town, district and county. So I fully support that. I agree we do need to follow the money, and I think we also need to follow what often goes on, variation of condition applications that change what the original decision was and maybe varies the amount of money, or sometimes removes the opportunity and the positivity of that development. The point you make, Chairman, all developments have an impact on somebody, and that's absolutely correct, and we need to be always aware of that. And the point Councillor Boquet makes about development in maybe unsustainable locations, the guiding principle of the National Planning Policy Framework is that all development must be sustainable. And if it's not sustainable, then this council should be saying this is not appropriate and it's not in the right location. I think, this has been a good piece of work. I want to thank Linda in particular, but all the members of the committee who worked on this and the officers. I'm very ambitious for the place shaping agenda, which is why I wanted the executive response to be strong and positive and embracing towards this. And I think there is a real role for this committee and maybe economy and maybe planning to look at how we are delivering on these messages going forward. So thank you, Chairman. Thank you for the debate today. And rest assured that as far as I'm concerned, we are now on a course that's going to be a much more positive one in terms of how we handle this area.
Thank you. Okay, so that's as far as we go on agenda item 7. We now need to agree. The actions required are we're invited to receive the executive's response to the report, which we've done, to agree a plan to monitor and scrutinise the implementation of the agreed recommendations. Yes, we've got an action plan and we're going to monitor it in relation to a report back to OSMB in September. And I think that the point that was made by Councillor Davies is important, and we ought to share our thinking with both planning and also with the Economy and Environment Committee. So that's as far as we go. So I'm proposing that the executive response is agreed. The 6-monthly update is brought back to the board for the September meeting, and I think we ought to share some of our comments with those other 2 committees, planning and the Economy and Environment. Is there could members indicate by virtue of dissent? If anybody's dissenting, then a roll call will be required to determine if the board supports the actions required. So, anybody dissenting from what I've just recommended?
None recorded so far, Chairman.
Thank you. If that's the case, then that is agreed. Okay, thank you, Justin, and thank you to Linda particularly, and all the members of the Scrutiny Review Group that helped us to get to this position. If we now move to agenda item 8, Draft 1 Council Commissioning Framework. This covers a period from 2021 to 2024, pre-decision scrutiny prior to a decision by the Executive on the 7th of April. Sophie Reeve, Assistant Director of Commercial, to present the report. Over to you, Sophie.
Thank you, Chair. We're asking OSMB, please, to scrutinise the Council's One Council Commissioning Framework report that's going to Executive on the 7th of April with the request that it's approved. The background to this report is that in 2019, at the end of 2019, there was a peer review carried out by the Council, and one of the conclusions of that peer review was that the Council's commissioning would be more effective if it was carried out in a One Council corporate context. As a result of that, a group of senior officers within the Council have got together. Those officers represent all directorates and service areas in the Council to propose a new approach to commissioning. That work has taken the benefit of what other authorities are doing. It actually retains those elements of our existing commissioning framework that are working well. But most importantly, the biggest influence on that work has been around the corporate plan, and to make sure that our approach to commissioning reflects the Council's priorities as set out in the corporate plan. The document we would like you to look at is set out in Appendix A to your report and starts at page 33. I don't propose to take you through it all. I just wanted very quickly to go to page 34 and point out the new elements of the commissioning framework so that that's clear to you. We've done, for the first time, we've included a vision. This focuses on what commissioning means to us, and that's a new element of our commissioning framework. We've also included an overarching aim. That's new too, and it sets out what we hope commissioning will achieve. The language in that overarching aim picks up the themes that we see in the corporate plan. So it talks about social value, local business growth, supporting community needs and priorities, protecting the environment, and giving people the opportunity to enjoy life and to have high aspirations. There are some new principles that we've set out for commissioning. So for the first time, we explicitly state that we are resident focused, that we will listen to our residents and their views will inform our understanding of their needs and the community needs. We set out to champion Lincolnshire and recognise that in order to provide effective commissioning, we're going to need to innovate. So that those are three new statements that our commissioning will have to reflect. We've also put in a new principle about robustness in terms of the service delivery model. So we need to take a clear evidence-based approach to an options appraisal, whether something is best delivered in-house, for example, or whether it's better being contracted out to the market. Finally, our final new principle, with having regard to the peer review, is that we'll have a one council approach to commissioning, and the same approach will be consistently applied through all parts of the council. There's nothing else I want to add, Mr. Chairman, so if anyone has any questions, I would be happy to deal with those.
Okay. If I just remind members that we're here to consider this report, to determine whether the board supports the recommendation to the executive, and to look at giving to the executive any additional comments that we want them to consider. Ray, Councillor Wotton, do we have any speakers?
None recorded, Chairman.
Okay. I've got a couple of questions. I suppose one of the good things about this review was that we went out to other councils, and I'm just interested in what other councils, which other councils did we get in touch with? What sort of things did they present to us that have been included? And were there any new ideas that the other councils had that we didn't take into account? So, in a sense, just a feel for councils that have been seen to be successful in delivering the agenda that we're looking at. So, could you give us some background into the other councils?
Yes. What we did was we looked at those authorities who'd been reviewing their commissioning practices over the preceding 2 years. So we were only really interested in current activity. What we found, we only found 5 of those authorities. All of those authorities were still using the commissioning cycle, so found value in the analyse, plan, do review commissioning cycle, which has been a part of our commissioning for some time. They were all very keen to be evidence-based, so that the commissioning had to be taken on a sound basis. We needed data to inform that decision-making, and when appropriate, there needed to be consultation with those service recipients and providers of those services. Some of the authorities were focusing on a more commercial approach to commissioning, and that was seen in particular in relation to their approach to contract management and skilling up their officers to carry that out effectively, so that you have the right balance between contract enforcement and development through effective partnerships with your key suppliers. So those were the themes that were coming through.
Okay, thank you. Got a couple more questions. The first is in relation to upskilling. Okay, if we're going to a different level, then how do we assess the training and development needs of our workforce in order to meet the new expectations? What plan have we got in place for the skilling to deliver?
As part of the commissioning review that's being carried out that's still a work in progress. That's due to report to a CLT in May. The proposal in that will be that the council creates a commissioning hub with some small additional resource, and part of that commissioning hub's responsibilities will be to carry out an analysis of the different skills required to produce effective commissioning. So we've already done some preliminary work on that. And again, that's something else that we're in communication with other authorities on. The expectation is that would then result in a programme of training and development across the council. What we haven't done and don't intend to do early in this process is identify the existing skills in place within the existing commissioning officers within the council. We're focusing first on identifying what we think the skills and expertise are that are necessary. That other work will follow.
Okay, and my final question for the moment is, when it looks at our principles, which is a new way of operating, it was an additional. Some of the things we've got: resident focused, good; evidence based, good; working in partnership, good, and so on. Is there any thought? What thought has been given to what I'm going to call a hierarchy of principles? Quite simply because some of these don't always go hand in hand. And sometimes there are real challenges when it comes to commissioning between, for example, resident focused, okay, and innovation. Now, has any thought been given to? I'm using the example, the words hierarchy of principles. How do we square some of these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 good things when they come into conflict?
I'm not sure actually that we have thought about it quite in those terms. What will sit below this is our commissioning wheel, and that identifies all the tasks that we will go through as part of our commissioning process. And those tasks reflect these principles. It may be, but those tasks also reflect, which is probably where you're coming from, that commissioning has to take place within a particular framework. So there will be a budget framework, there will be council policy, there will be statutory requirements that we will have to deliver upon. And so in that sense, those principles might find themselves constrained at times, depending on the particular circumstances. But I don't think we've seen those principles as in competition with each other. Certainly there are now some additional tasks that will require us, for example, to consider innovation on each and every commissioning piece of work that there hasn't been previously.
Okay, fine. Thanks for that. Ray, any indication of people who want to speak?
Yes, Chairman, I have one speaker, Councillor Jackie Brockway.
Lovely. Councillor Brockway, Jackie, over to you.
Thank you for this, Sophie. I think this is very interesting because this ties in very, very well with the previous paper that we've just looked at. It's about what we're doing. We're moving to a very important point of working with residents instead of doing things to residents. So doing with rather than doing to. And I think that's a fundamental change in the respect of the organisation. I think it's always been there, but it hasn't been overt. So now that we are stating that this is a part of the way that we're dealing with people, I certainly, as a resident, would appreciate the knowledge of that, to know that my views are important. You're talking to developers, you're talking with residents, and although this is potentially given, it has to be, if you're commissioning, you have to be aware of the commercial aspect, obviously. There seems to be a strong awareness of the aesthetics around the commercial decisions that we're making. Now, for me, that's very important, simply because we're laying down things that could be in place as structures for a long time in the future. And we do need a certain amount of beauty and efficiency all in one. So I'm really interested in keeping a bit of an eye on this, because I think you've taken a significant step in what is actually a short paper. You're saying a lot here, and I'm very enthusiastic about it and certainly support what you're trying to achieve here. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a good point.
Thank you.
Anyone else, Ray?
No further speakers, Chairman.
Okay. Can I finally just pick up on exactly what Jackie said, Councillor Brockway, about how do we deliver being resident focused in what we might call a commercial world about the way that we commission services, because I applaud exactly what Jackie said, but it's a pretty stiff challenge, isn't it, to be resident focused in the commissioning world, and to be seen to be heard, to be seen to be listening to what people say. How are we going to do that? What's the operationalising of it?
The operationalising of it, and this work again is still subject to being signed off by CLT, but in terms of the development of those commissioning tasks that we are putting together, we would see the listening to be located very much in the the needs analysis of our citizens and of our communities, and we would rely very much on the data that we have, national data sets, local data sets. It will see potentially increased discussion, consultation, appropriate forums with our service users and our residents, and feeding back information from contract management function, where those services are being delivered direct to service areas. So there is a wealth of information there. I think it's a question of how we then make sure that that's reflected in the way we assess what services are best required to meet those needs, and then to have that continual period of review. So to be more conscious of walking through that commissioning cycle that has been in place in the council for some time now.
Great, thank you. Final question, Ray, is anybody else wants to speak?
None recorded, Chairman.
Okay, right. Can I begin by thanking Sophie? Thank you, Sophie, for the paper. As I've said, the recommendation to the executive is that the executive approves the One Council commissioning framework as set out in Appendix A, and we'll come to a vote on that in a moment. The comments from the board's discussion from myself and Councillor Brockway have been recorded, I hope, by the senior scrutiny officer to be passed on to the executive. So I'm now looking for a proposer and a seconder to support the recommendation.
Happy to propose, Chairman.
And I'll second, Chairman. Councillor
Thank you. So it's Councillor Watson and Councillor Brockway. Okay, we'll now vote on this item, and you're voting on whether we support the recommendation and agree to provide the additional comments to the executive. Nick will read out each name, as usual, of the members present in alphabetical order, and you're asked to say for, against, or abstain. Over to you, Nick.
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Mrs. Bowcat.
For.
Councillor Mrs. Brockway.
For.
Councillor Kendrick.
For.
Councillor Macy.
For.
Councillor Marfleet.
For.
Councillor Parker.
For.
Councillor Pepper.
For.
Councillor Wotton.
For.
Councillor Rowe.
For.
That's unanimous, Chairman.
That's fine, thank you. The recommendation is therefore supported. And thanks once again, Sophie.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so page 35 to page 42, item 9, performance of the corporate support services contract. This item is about the update on the performance of the corporate support services contract. And I think that John Wickens, is taking this, and also Kevin Hales, who is the Senior Operations Director from serco, will be providing us with a verbal update as well. Okay, John, over to you.
Chairman, if I could intervene at this point, it's Arnd Hobbohm, serco contract manager. So I am going to take us through this item, Chairman. Sorry.
Okay, thank you. My fault. Welcome.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the update on the serco contract. The report takes the usual format that you're familiar with, so I'm not going to dwell on any of the particular content, so I'll take you straight to the key points. In Table 1, you'll see the overall KPI performance summary. There are 40 KPIs in the serco contract at present, and as you can see, they've largely been achieved with only one very slight miss on TSL. And a particular point to note is that you'll see that the trend of mitigation, which includes those affected by COVID, has been trending downwards in recent months. Moving on to exceptions, as I mentioned, there is one very small miss on the TSL, on PM KPI 01, a really tiny one. And it hasn't happened for a long time, so we have no particular resolution for that. It was one of those things that happens. Moving on to mitigations, as per the previous report, it's been split into two. So we have a section 3.1, table 3.1 outlines those things which are generally in mitigation and receiving attention regardless of COVID, and in table 3.2 we've outlined those items which have been in mitigation as a result of COVID. And you'll see particularly on table 3.2 that of those things, they have all moved from a red status to an improved status, 2 of them to green and are therefore not in mitigation at the moment, and 1 red to amber, which is a very good result for the recent months. At item 5, table 4, is a new item at the request of the chairman, which has been introduced to give you an insight into those items where there are changes. So it's a dynamic contract. KPIs don't remain the same, and after 5 years you would expect things to move on from time to time, and here we will be capturing over the last 12 months any changes of KPIs that have occurred for the board's interest. As you can see, there's been one change back in October. CSE KPI 1 has been replaced by a different measure, CSE KPI 12. Item 6, again, something that's been on this report for a few occasions now, is the green trend analysis. Again, a request in the previous board meeting, just to analyse the performance of those KPIs which are performing at green level. So even though they are passing, a request was made to identify whether there were any trends or directions to take into consideration. And I can again report that there are none to be concerned about. All green is stable and delivering well. Abatement points are captured here, but are beginning to become less interesting in that there are very few abatement points applied. And as you can see from the chart, since October 2017, there have been very few applications of abatement. So in summary, serco have continued to be flexible and responsive during this part of the COVID crisis, and all services have continued during the last period. The CSC has been under particular pressure and continues to be, but again has shown considerable improvement in the last 2 months. Overall performance has been very good. So I'll hand you over to Kevin for any brief updates he wants to give from the serco point of view.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll keep it very brief. I know you've got a packed agenda. I've only got probably a couple of points to make. One, just to thank my staff publicly and reference we have maintained a strong performance in recent months, and on the back of COVID that has been a challenge at times, but we've been able to support LCC wherever they've needed, and I think the staff have done a really good job in the last 12 months managing that. The other couple of points I'd make is just the extensive work that we've currently got going on supporting LCC's transformation goals. So we've got particularly a number of projects in the CSC around automation and reviewing a range of processes, both in the care and wellbeing space and the corporate space. We've got a programme reviewing 6 different transaction types, looking at how customer interacts with us and how we can improve those customer journeys. So there's a lot of work going on to keep us on the front foot and keep the services delivering some really good outcomes for LCC's customers. And finally, just to reference some other value we're trying to give back to both LCC and the local community. We've just concluded a 3-month pilot with LCC's other partner, Bernardo's, to run a mentoring programme for care leavers in the area. That we ran a programme that mentored 4 young care leavers, and we intend to repeat that over the year, 3 or 4 times a year to maintain that. And it was quite a positive experience. I myself mentored a young person, and it was really valuable for them around getting back in employment and understanding the challenges of the workplace. So as an organisation, we continue to enjoy the partnership with LCC, and we want to keep pressing forward with initiatives like this to keep us engaged with LCC, and hopefully in the future, as the commissioning programme kicks off the review for the future, we hope to be part of that journey still.
Thank you. That's good. Okay. Councillor Wotton, have we got any speakers?
Not at this moment, Chairman.
Okay. Could I refer both to page 42 and the conclusion? And I just want to just say, first of all, that from a rocky start at the beginning, that this has been an improving journey. And I'm interested in the way that we describe our performance at the moment, because in the conclusion, the general picture has continued to be one of good performance. Now, I don't want to get into an argument about we seem to be nitpicking about good performance and excellent performance, but we all aim, don't we, to be excellent. Okay, if we put aside the problems that we've had, okay, which have been tackled and resolved, issues around, for example, some of the things that have already been mentioned, high demand rates as a result of COVID at the customer service centre. Okay, if they've been handled, I'm just interested in why we think we assess the current performance as good and not better than good. That's trying to get an explanation of where we could be if we were excellent. Okay, now that's based on the language that's been offered by our senior officers. So just tell us about why good and not excellent, even if we take into account the circumstances. Now, what would we have had to do to be excellent then, and why haven't we done it?
Well, I mean, I can give an answer to that. It maybe needs Sophie or James to comment, but obviously I think we are excellent and we have done a super job. But I mean, look, I think if I'll just pass a quick comment and then pass back to Sophie and James to add. There have been areas in the last 12 months that have been a particular challenge, and even we look back with hindsight and say we could have done something different. In the children's and the adult space, we had some particularly high abandonment rates over that period, which we were disappointed in. So when we look and mark ourselves, do we say we could have done some things better? I think yes. I think overall the account is in an excellent place compared to where it's been. But as with anything, you're paying an outsourcer. You want best in class services, and there's still areas where we can keep pushing and challenging ourselves to give you that outcome you want. I don't know whether Sophie, you want to add something.
Well, we're a scrutiny committee, right, and we're looking actually for good high level performance consistently. Okay, so I'm just interested, and thank you for that. Yeah, good and excellent. What's the gap?
From my perspective, I think certainly in terms of the last year, in particular, the way Serco have responded to COVID and have supported the council, they have been excellent. They have been extremely flexible about what they'll do. They've done things at short notice. We've not spent very much time at all in the detail of the contract. It has been very much like dealing with another part of the council. There has been no separation there. It's allowed us to respond swiftly and expediently. So in my mind, that's not really about the KPIs. That's about the partnership and the relationship. And it has been seamless, really. So in my terms, that has been excellent. And had it not been, I don't think we would have been able to respond as we have done to our communities in relation to the various schemes the councillors had to deliver on behalf of government. I think Kevin's right in terms of the abandon rate. We did have some very high abandon rate in children's services and adults, and that was over the summer in particular. So that wasn't good. That was a poor performance. I think Serco's response in the way, and LCC's response was, I don't know if excellent is quite the right word, but we worked together to put it right. LCC put in resource, Serco put in additional resource, and we have now stabilised that position, even in the light of all of the additional demands on the CSC. I think we're starting to see some added value engagement with Serco, so they are now helping us with our transformation programme, and if that works effectively, I guess that will be another, we're early days on that, another measure of excellence.
I think we're getting
again not related to the KPIs.
No, that's what I'm talking about, the KPIs, because KPIs in the beginning, we were highly focused. You know, we were looking very critically. Okay, we're still on the KPIs. I'm not sure if the general picture, which is the reference that's made in this report, is about the KPIs. I'd like to think it is, because that's what it's about. And I just think that good and excellent, I was interested in the gap between the two, and particularly lessons learned, because it was said, you know, that we could have done better. That's a message just for the future, that's all. Okay.
Chairman, I had a speaker.
Yeah, sorry, who's the speaker, please?
Councillor Rob Kendrick.
Fine. Councillor Kendrick, Rob, over to you.
Thanks, Chairman. I was just interested in the remarks earlier on about mentoring for care leavers. Is this a one-off, or is it going to be part of your plan going into the future that this will be a regular action taken?
It's a regular activity. So we did a pilot. We did it for 3 months, and we've agreed with Bernardo's, who's supporting us with LCC, to repeat that at least 3 times a year. We have some ambition as well when we get back into the offices to run some workshop type activities as well, but we're not quite there yet. But it's certainly an expectation that we're going to continue doing this mentoring throughout the remainder of the contract.
Thank you. Will there be any follow-up to see how people have got on following the mentoring, or is that not part of the programme?
Yeah, we've had a feedback. We've had a range of feedback sessions gathering insight from the pilot. More than happy to include some of those comments and references in the next report that comes here.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chairman.
That's lovely. Okay. Yeah, just a period for thinking, but anyone else? If Ray?
No further speakers, Chairman.
Okay. Fine. Can I thank the speakers, everybody who's contributed. We as a board are required to seek assurance about the performance of the corporate support services contract and provide feedback and challenge as required. I think we've done that. My own view is keep up the good work and try to make it excellent in terms of reporting, at least. So I propose that the board receives the report. We have been reassured about the performance of the corporate support services contract. Okay. If anybody disagrees, can they indicate in the chat room, please? If there's no dissent, is that the case, Councillor Wotton?
Yes, none recorded, Chairman.
Okay, so we don't need a roll call vote. Thank you. Therefore, by absence, that proposal is agreed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Chairman, just to note that Councillor Wendy Burke has had to leave the meeting for a few minutes.
Thank you. Noted. Okay. Thanks everybody who contributed. So, if we could move now to page 43 of our pack, which is the Corporate Support Services Review, what's called the CSSR, an update and emerging draft IMT model. James Drury, executive member, is going to introduce. Thank you
very much, Chair. Thank you. Yes, so this probably follows on quite nicely from the serco performance, because what we're talking about here is the range of services that are currently operated via the contract with serco. That contract is coming to an end, and we've extended on 2 occasions. We have no option to extend any further. So we're now beginning the thought process around how we wish to deliver those services in the future and the different options for that delivery. We've reported this to your board on a couple of occasions already. So this is an update, and it's split into 2. There's the non-IT IMT elements, which Sophie will briefly cover now and talk about some of the work there, although that's very early days on that. And then I'll ask John just to pick up briefly the information on the slides around where our thinking is going on the IMT delivery model for the future, which is building, as I say, on what we've already presented to you in the past. So if it's okay with you, Chair, I'll hand over to Sophie just to quickly update on the non-IMT elements.
That's great. Sophie.
I think Gail is going to, yes, thank you, share her screen and the slides. So as James has just said, corporate support services currently being delivered by serco. The contract expires March 2024. We can't extend it further, so we need to understand what our plans for those services are going forward. Most of the slide deck is going to cover the IMT service, and I'm really just going to remind you where we've got to more generally. Could I have the next slide, please? So the services we're talking about are IMT, payroll, HR admin, adult care finance, Exchequer Finance and the Customer Service Centre. We've already had a steer from CLT, executive councillors and from OSMB that we shouldn't expand the scope of those services that are being considered in our recommissioning, and that it's probably not appropriate to be looking for a single supplier going forward in a business process type provider contract. Because those where one provider provides all of these services, that type of contracting's fallen out of favour both with contractors and with councils, and it doesn't really fit our preferred approach for IMT recommissioning, which is to move from one principal supplier dealing with all of our IT requirements to a number of specialist providers. Now, the next slide, please. This is an overview really of our timeline, so it shows where we are on that recommissioning work. At the moment we're just focusing on IMT because of the complexity of it and because the solution will take longer to put in place for IT than for the other elements of service. You'll see that the intention has been to start the work on those other service areas, looking at what the as-is position is and what the to-be ought to look like in April of this year. We're having a think about that to see if that's the best way of resourcing, using the resources and the time available. But subject to that review, we anticipate being in a position to carry out an options appraisal later this year, leading to a formal decision about the way forward in April, end of March, April 2022. And I don't think, yes, moving on to John now.
Thank you, Sophie. So, as James introduced, we have a transition in service provider thrust upon us in 24. We've run out of options to extend the contract further, so we started to look at the future for IMT services. This slide tries to set the scene and the drivers, if you like, that cause us to look at service provision for 2024. In the bottom left-hand corner, you've seen those graphics before, but it describes a situation where the main services are provided by Serco, a broad range of different things that happen under the banner of IMT. There is some use of other providers for specialist pieces of work already and has been for some time. And then there are those things that are delivered internally and tries to depict that situation changes only insofar as that balance, if you like, between the number of providers changes. There is no sort of saying Serco couldn't be one of those providers, of course, but that we're looking for providers with expertise in the different towers, as they are known, that make up IMT. Drivers tend to be that the market has changed, and as Sophie said, there has been a move away from business process outsourcing, and this is driven by a number of factors, not least the drift towards cloud services, and the way that those mega vendors go to market is having a fundamental sort of effect on IMT services across the world, really. Next slide, please. Go. Again, this slide looks very similar to when you first saw it, and that is a good thing. The fundamental drivers, the basic principles have survived challenge, and sort of very limited fine-tuning has taken place there. They're there really just to remind us why we're doing this, and I won't read them out in full, but the operational drivers, the need for agility, ability to manage ongoing change, the technical drivers, which I've sort of mentioned in passing some of those, and the commercial driver. And below that, the principles, deliver IT that works and ensuring service quality with value for money principles without increasing the gross cost of IT services. I will talk to the asterisks, which might be new. At the bottom it says this excludes transitional investment for IMT. In other words, what we're saying there is that we're talking about achieving no step change in the gross cost of IMT services compared to the previous year of the transition. So in the year 23-24, the design principle is that we're seeking to achieve a service design that doesn't affect a gross change, albeit perhaps one to reduce cost. We don't rule that out, but certainly no massive increase in the gross cost of IMT services in the year 24-25. So just to explain what that's trying to say. The other principles remain unchanged, being agility, the increasing need for to meet the needs that LCC is meeting itself. It too is subject to these same forces, and the need to become an increasingly digital organisation, and the fact that IMT will be a very different looking thing in 24. Even if the contract wasn't coming up for renew, because increasingly we're not about building technologies, we are about commissioning services, and the technical work being more about the exploiting the data in those services or integrating those services into whole value chains, and so on and so forth. So the sort of work that your technical team will be doing will be pretty unrecognisable in the space of the next 3, 4, 5 years. And that work increasingly will be seen as part of an enabling service. I think in 2019 we talked about becoming an enabling services. We're on that journey already, and I think in reality we'll just be part of an enabling service where lots of things that happen, some of that today we think of as business support, some of it happening in the digital engagement team, some of that happening in data analysis and data services. All of those things really will just become this holistic enabling service type concept that will support LCC's sort of modernisation as an organisation. Next slide, please. This slide tries to look at break down IMT into its component parts and explain somewhat those things that sit in the different parts of that triangle. So the green elements just are clearly the LCC, the internally provided functions. The blue elements are those things today that tend to be sort of in separate contractual containers or require procurement from time to time. And in the reddy pink colour, those things that are enshrined in our arrangements currently provided by Serco in that prime supplier model. Next slide. This slide is somewhat different in context, and what it tries to do is to say, well, that then leads to these areas of procurement. These would be the kind of things that we think we can commercialise still, and some increase in those things that we feel, in the absence of a viable market, we would, take responsibility for internally. So the sort of major areas of procurement, or those towers that I referred to being support desk and end user device operations, managed cloud services, those are things like our hosted services and Office 365 and so forth. Enhanced security services seems to be it's a new requirement. Security never stands still, and the need to continually raise our game to stay ahead of the bad guys is reflected in most organisations now are sort of forming relationships with specialist providers who monitor, assess and assist under the perpetual barrage of attacks that organisations like ourselves find ourselves under these days. Network services and the contact centre technology may require it's a separate commercial container. So those are the sort of things that will keep Sophie's busy team busy with as we move to market and try and describe and specify those services with a view to procurement, as opposed to trying to evolve and develop the internal service. Next slide, please. The service design, we had some comments and observations around, why was it different? How could we know this was a safe direction to take? And James came up with the idea that we could ask Gartner, who we have a partnership arrangement with, to analyse our proposed service design, compare that with the work that other councils have done, and report independently of Sophie's team and my team, and give additional assurance that design was a safe direction to take. That work is in progress. And indeed, since these slides were produced, I've seen slides produced by other councils, interestingly shown to me by a possible supplier that we were just having some exploratory talks with. And indeed, we were quite encouraged to see that they were extremely similar to the kind of arrangements that we had planned. So we are seeing other people's analysis coming up with the same conclusions, which isn't surprising given the sort of macro nature of the effects we're talking about here. Next slide, please. So why change? Of course, transition comes with risk. Is that risk avoidable? No, not really. The contract does come to a conclusion in March 24, and even if Serco were successful in bidding for some of those towers, it will still be transitionary elements and risk as the changes have to be delivered. So some of those changes we can start before 24. The internal service has a number of pressures upon it that don't respect these contractual borders. The changing world, the fact that LCC is now an organisation starting on a journey of transformation. All those things require IMT to change perpetually, but never more so than over the coming 2 to 3 years. So it's an evolutionary process rather than a revolutionary process. The work that continues is we're considering the areas of vendor and license management. We're talking to Serco, talking to people like Gartner, and just forming an opinion whether there are advantages to LCC and considering those things ahead of time. We had looked at a strategy to bring in Microsoft Unified Support to change our contractual relationship with Microsoft. And the sort of imperative to do that has been somewhat considerably strengthened by the creation of the transformation program by the chief executive. So that sort of we're looking at that now as that will deliver value in the run up to 24, but also massively support our transformation program. And we are starting to change and develop our in-house team to reflect that sort of enabling service, which is still not finished, but then moving on to the service model and target operating model for 2024. And all that work should come to a head to drive that decision in March 22. Next slide, please. Unified support, as I say, it really has kind of 3 tranches of value to us. It gives us development pathway to help us grow the team in the way that we need to grow it. It gives us a different contractual relationship with Microsoft and a much deeper degree of technical support to assist both Serco, ourselves, and any third parties working in the mix as we start to move our technical environment into Microsoft hosting. And it also provides up to design phase of projects, that technical consultancy on Microsoft services, which are highly complex and extremely broad range of services within the context of the transformation program. So it sort of delivers on 3 planks, and that last one is essentially the driver that pulls it forward in our thinking to a sort of here and now thing rather than something we're considering over the coming year. Next slide, please. So the key risks, protecting our commercial interests. We mentioned the Gartner review, making sure the service design is fit for purpose. Protecting our community. That is heavily aligned to the activity within the transformation program to make sure our systems remain safe and are looked after in a secure fashion, and that citizens' data is in a safe pair of hands. Protecting the council's reputation. Really, this whole process underpins the mitigation of that risk in terms of scrutiny's role through to the decision-making process, through to the independent consultancy that we're using to form a view on these plans, and protecting our staff and supporting partners. And beyond protecting them, giving them sort of significant advantage, if you like, help our retention of staff by ensuring that the services we're providing our internal workforce are comparable with any they would get in other organisations. It's not a disincentive to work for LCC. It makes it a better place to work, an easier place to be effective and productive. Next slide, please. So the next steps, finishing up really on behalf of Sophie, the IMT bit we've talked about, it does sit in the context of those other services that sit within the corporate support services review, and that work continues to report to both OSMB and Scrutiny to reach the decision-making process, as we say, early next year. I'm happy to take any questions, and we can flip back onto slides if that would be helpful.
Sure, thanks for that, John, and Sophie and James. So, questions, have we got any yet, Ray?
Not yet, Chairman. Yes, Councillor Jackie Brockway.
Over to you, Jackie.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that, John. And I mean, I really do want to acknowledge the huge amount of work that you've done on our IT. If you consider where we were and where we are now, I mean, I take my hat off to you. Thank you so much. I'm interested in the concept that you put forward that this is about transition, not transformation. And on the basis of the report and what you said, I'm pretty certain I understand what you mean. But we're going to be going with a new company which has different working practices. And those working practices are almost certainly going to impact on the way we work. So how will you either impose or work together with the new people who come in to see that they do stay within our need for transition rather than changing things in a direction we may not want to go? Have I made that? It's a bit of a convoluted way of asking the question. What I'm worried about is somebody coming in with new ideas and kind of moving us away from where you've got us at the moment, which is a much stronger position than we've been before. Are you able to pick up what I'm trying to say there?
Yes, absolutely. So really the service support side of IMT is about the continuing availability of commoditised services. And so it tries to split those things that should be and are by definition unique to LCC, you know, the nature of our data, some of the solutions we develop, possibly some of the creative ways in which we address citizens' needs, as opposed to those things which are more commodity based, i.e. the devices we use, the cloud services we consume. Those will be largely identical to most of the other organisations in the world. So the platform we're using today, for instance, Microsoft Teams, there are currently on average 115 million Teams calls a day. So clearly this is not a bespoke system for LCC. We are a small part of that traffic, and we can't in effect really change the way the platform works. We consume it, but there are times when it's much better to buy off the shelf and consume off the shelf because it's cost effective, it delivers at scale, it's highly agile, and so on and so forth. So the service design problem that we're trying to meet is really those elements which are much more commoditized, and how do we deliver best value in predictable ways so that we're not asking organizations to do something exotic or different. What we're going for is really sort of cost-effective quality, and commoditize those things that we can commoditize whilst taking more responsibility internally for those things that don't fit that model, if you understand me. So that you're right, there are both of those paradigms at work, but they're dealt with in different ways.
Okay, is that okay, Jackie?
Thank you, Jim. So you feel confident that given the big transition that we are going to meet, that you can actually keep hold of that?
In a way, I am confident, and in a way, it wouldn't stop happening even if I wasn't, because the world is going to change. You know, we will move to the cloud, and we will have to adopt these services, and we will have to, as an organisation, become more digital. You know, I think our citizens will just demand it eventually, even if we try to, for some, you know, strange reason, if as an organisation we decided we were reluctant to move in that direction. So the art becomes making that accentuate the positive and make that an asset to LCC, and accepting that change has to be good sometimes. No change is an option, so let's make change good.
Okay, thank you, Chairman.
Thanks, Jackie. Okay, Ray.
No further questions, Chairman.
Okay, I've got a couple of questions, in a sense similar to perhaps what Jackie's been asking. The first one is the simple one is, as we stand at the moment, and I'm saying to you, John, that you're the lead on this. Is there anything that keeps you awake at night, thinking about the plan that we've got and what you might call the fragile points? Or is this a seamless transition, both in principle but also in practice?
It's by most people's definition, IMT is a complex service, so there's lots of moving parts, and so the bit that we feel presents the highest risk is in the service integration and management. It's called, you know, how do you get if you're changing from one key supplier and two or possibly three sit where that one supplier sat, how do you manage the relationship between those parties to get effective delivery of service to the organisation's benefit? Because yes, you get the implicit benefits that they tend to specialise in that tower and at what they do, and specialisation is the way of the world in IMT now. It's an extremely broad church, and there are pure play providers who will give you incredible value for money, incredible quality, but they will not move outside of that pure play. In their service is designed to deliver a certain quality, a certain ability to an organisation. And the art of management changes to one where we've got to do that service integration and management piece. So that's the bit that we are analysing more carefully, making sure we skill up in good time, and sort of introduce this concept slowly. We don't do none of it, but essentially serco do that. Rather than LCC at the moment. Serco do integrate a number of players, and not all the services we provide, we consume are actually delivered by Serco. They are subcontracted by Serco and integrated into one whole, and Serco have some expertise at that service integration and management. So it's a well understood challenge in IMT. There are pros and cons, and the thing that keeps me up, Chairman, is making sure we exploit the advantages and don't fall foul to the disadvantages where they're avoidable.
Okay. The next question is 2024 seems a long way away. Here we are in the beginning of 2021, but it's not. I appreciate that. That's two things in part of that. Is we know a lot of stuff now, okay, but to go back to Donald Rumsfeld and this whole question of there are known knowns, but also there are unknown unknowns, okay, and by that, to put it into real concrete, we are now so at ease with MS Teams and Zoom. But if we went back 3 or 4 years, maybe the world out there was also using it, but not in the same way at all. And it has been a game changer in many ways in terms of both the social, but the business applications of it. Okay. Now, as we progress, there will be developments like that. And I'm interested in knowing, for the benefit of the county council as a whole, how we will integrate those, what I think are major changes, even if they're not technologically major. But how will we embrace change on that journey between March 2021 and 24?
Embracing change, it has to happen at two levels. You have to make the change work, and so in a way, that's the the part of the problem that sits within your IMT service is making sure where change is inevitable, that change is delivered in a way that the organisation can adapt to and delivers business benefit. And the other half of that change is then the cultural business change, that people accept that change, adapt to it and adjust. And I think the lesson we can take from COVID, Mr. Chairman, is that people very rapidly adapted to a new way of working. So much so, for instance, that we see unexpected effects. The way our telephone systems, with certain notable exceptions about which relate to people's relationship to the outside world and their use of PSTN or national telephone numbers. But the vast majority of officers now use Teams to talk to even external parties. They've stopped using that national telephone number or their mobile number and diarise appointments in order to have conversations in Teams and so on and so forth. And so the need for those national telephone numbers has fallen away quite dramatically. And I'm not sure we would have predicted that. And so it's a classic example of what you've just described, of a change that was difficult to foresee, adapted to it, adjusting your strategy, and just incorporate it into your strategy and your work plan to make sure that if there are cost savings, you reap those cost savings. If there are business advantages, you reap those business advantages. It comes back to one of the key drivers in this programme, that word agility, is how can we organise ourselves to give ourselves the best chance of changing shape with agility. And that was one of our core drivers, our core principles in the programme design. So you're right, you can't know the unknowable, but you could give yourself a good chance of being adaptable.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you. Good answer. Appreciate it. Ray, have we got any more questions?
None at all, Chairman. Thank you.
Okay. So, if that's all the speakers, can I thank everybody that's contributed. That we're required as a board to consider the report and the presentations and provide feedback, and certainly Jackie and I have done that, and that's on the emerging draft model that we're looking to for the future IMT services. So I'm going to propose that the board receives the report and the presentation and accepts the feedback provided on the emerging draft IMT model, and we've taken into account the consideration by officers about the progress of the work. Does that sound okay? If you disagree, can you indicate in the chat room? Any dissent? So, Ray, in the chat room, has there been any dissent?
None recorded, Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Then the paper has been agreed. Thank you, and thanks again to the presenters. Okay. Fine. Item 11, update on IMT services, user engagement and the project portfolio. Item again, 2 areas of IMT services. Okay, thanks. Can we move to item 11 then, please? Sorry, John. John and Donna Fry.
That's right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to present the first part of this paper, as unfortunately Alison is not able to join us due to a dental problem that she's had to rush off and have seen to. I'd like to thank the Chairman for considering a suggestion we made where we wondered how we could give OSMB a better overview of the whole of IMT services. For some time, you've seen the activity of Donna's part of IMT, the portfolio and resources, where we govern the delivery of change projects. And you've seen the sort of service management side of IMT enshrined in Sophie's report as part of the performance of the CSSR, the Corporate Support Services contract with serco. But there are those other green areas, those towers that sit inside IMT, and one of those that was scheduled to report today is the area of user engagement. I will stress this paper is largely to try and introduce and give the board an understanding of what this part of the IMT service does. It is limited in terms of any metrics or qualitative statements that one could strictly call something you could scrutinise and monitor, but the aspiration is that in future reports we roll up some view that we form, try and create metrics around, say, things like customer satisfaction and so on and so forth, and possibly qualitative statements on what that team has been up to, and incorporate those in a bigger roll-up of IMT going forward. But for this paper, we thought it would benefit the board to just have some description of their purpose within the overarching IMT function. In the CSSR programme, I mentioned this thing about evolution. And indeed, as far back as 2019 in the IMT strategy, we talked about IMT becoming an enabling service. This team was already in existence, but it had a classic footprint as far as it was originally conceived as a buffer service, typical inside IMT services of that era, that protected the technical team from incoming inquiries and escalations, and the large amount of traffic that the user base can generate into both the service desk, which serco sort of deal with on a day-to-day basis, but also into the governance team when people feel they're not getting quite exactly what they expected. And given the service takes typically 5,500 calls a month, you could see how a small internal team could just be swamped by that sort of traffic incoming. But it's moved to become very much more than that. People started to develop this business relationship management function. On our journey to becoming an enabling service, we're taking that really further to become, if you like, that tip of the iceberg, the tip of this new enabling service that we're trying to provide to gap fill that gap that exists between what users need of the IMT service and the kinds of things that can be sort of commercialised and are commercialised with serco today. They removed the need for users to understand the structure of the IMT service. So as with any good business design that's providing a service, it shouldn't be important for users to understand the structure of IMT and who they should be contacting. So the user engagement team provide that front-facing user engagement process that sort of fulfills both a signposting role, but in recent times also a degree of help and assistance, advice and guidance that it hadn't historically offered. So that is really that first part of the enabling service coming to life. They have recently been joined by systems advisors, which sit inside that same user engagement function. And the systems advisors were there to have a slightly deeper knowledge of the tools and softwares that we were delivering on a global basis across the whole corporate body, to help users with how do I questions. Whilst we do have a support desk, it's predominantly there for break-fix scenarios. And serco's priority has to be to meet its KPIs, to fix people with broken equipment and or deliver sort of potted changes known as service requests. And so that demand typically went less well met. And so we've started to sort of invest in skills and a limited number of people, only 2 at the moment, who can sort of help people use the tools better. As we're on the tip of about to start a corporate deployment for a number of desktop changes, modern desktop, more typically referred to as Office 365 in the most part, obviously 2 people will not be able to cope with the demand of that. And so a broader network of people have been sort of recruited from the broader organisation, not within the IMT function, but people doing their day jobs have been, we're reaching out, recruiting those people, giving them additional training, additional resources, so they can become sort of in-place champions within their departments as part of socialising these changes, getting people used to how to use these new tools, and as an attempt to not swamp the support desk with things that aren't actually broken, but people just want some advice and guidance on how to use them. serco will, of course, assist in this as best they can, but their primary focus will always remain on break-fix scenarios. So that, in a nutshell, is the sort of function of the user engagement service. As I said, it's reasonably new in its sort of current concept. And what we hope to do, Mr. Chairman, is to sort of develop the customer satisfaction surveys that we do to start to recover metrics on how people are receiving that service and their opinion of it and whether they are satisfied with it. And we would hope to expose that and some qualitative statements on the sort of pieces of work that the team have been focused on. They have focus areas at any point in time, and a qualitative statement as to how those focus areas have been delivered, so that overview and scrutiny can get at least some insight on this part of IMT, which historically you've been somewhat unsighted on.
Thank you.
Happy to take any questions on that.
Sure, thanks, John. Any questions, Ray?
Not this time, Chairman.
Okay. Can I go to page 64 and the role of systems advisors? Because, in a sense, this was at the heart of what I was thinking about when I asked you to consider bringing a paper to us. It's essentially that we have, I would say, comprehensive and complex IT systems in place. And I was interested in knowing how much underused capacity we've got to affect changing the way that our workforce use it. In other words, this enabling service, because here we've got the, just to use an example, a machine that will do many, many, many things. But if the staff in the organisation don't know about those many, many, many things, then it doesn't influence the way that they can change their way of working. And that's captured on page 64. As the pace of technology changes, transformation increases. It was noticeable that the IMT department was not always able to ensure colleagues in other directorates were up to date with how the changes could improve the way they work on a day-to-day basis. So I wouldn't mind knowing about any examples, because there must be, in a sense, the potential to quantify this change in work. In other words, that before the systems advisors got involved, we were doing X and it cost Y. Now that they're involved, we're doing Z and the cost is reduced to, or we can expand the scope. So it's either quantity or quality. I wondered how we could translate that enabling service work into something that is countable, quantifiable.
I think there's a two-part answer to that question, really. I think the in the write-up, we do make reference to the fact user engagement own our communications function. So they talk on behalf of the whole IMT service to the service. And they work very closely with serco when serco are communicating sort of service issues and day-to-day issues. But part of that communication increasingly is introducing concepts, things you might be able to do for yourself, tools that are coming and things for you to think about how your department might exploit those things. On more particularly on your second point, enabling service is really working hand in glove, or even at times embedded within business units, and so it is for the business unit to look at a business problem, discuss if needed with people like the systems advisors, but really the whole IMT function will increasingly exist for this purpose. Is, what's the optimum path, the best option for us to sort of modernise, optimise, reduce cost, improve, reduce risk or improve quality, and sort of we perform a part in that, but not owning the business process. It probably, I would say, the answer to the final answer to the question of can you demonstrate that you have improved quality or reduced cost or reduced risk should lie with the owner of the process, the business owner of the process. I don't think it would be possible at a systematic level to claim certain results by doing certain things. It very much depends on the business context, and we don't own the business context. Does that make sense?
It does, but not necessarily from what we might call the highest level possible, in the sense that if we are if we have the capacity to change and we don't use that change, and then we do use it, then we should be able to say, as you said, the three things. Has it reduced risk? Has it improved quality of performance? Or has it reduced costs? And I'm interested in whether or not that potential there can be captured. Now, it's not an answer that we need to have now, but it does seem a fundamental issue about the expenditure may not be fully realising potential savings or enhanced performance. And I'm just interested in finding out whether or not a piece of work can be done to capture any of those benefits, either reduce risk, costs, or quality. Now that's an important point, because if not, then we're not fully. In one sense, very simply, how many times have we all said in relation to a piece of computer kit, I didn't know you could do that? Okay.
Yes.
And I want to minimise, I want us as an organisation to minimise the, I don't know we could have done that. That's the point.
Yes. So not knowing you could do something, we are owning that problem. To some extent, we will use our communications plan and ramp up our communications and socialise these technologies, what they do, where they can help, to try and spark the thought process inside business managers as to when they should perhaps reach out, talk to us, and explore those possibilities. And I think there's a two-part answer again, really, to that problem about, are you winning that, risk, quality, efficiency question. I think there are large changes, typically things you would formalise within a transformation programme that have a full business case. And yes, absolutely, you can, through a process of cost accounting and benefits realisation, establish if you got the results on those three metrics that you were shooting for in that programme. But I think what we're seeing across the world's sort of corporations is that for every £1 million you save in that way, you save £1 million through 1,000 little things or 10,000 little things that people do in their everyday life. Now, they're much harder to capture, to even know they've happened. It's about personal efficiency. It's about you get clues sometimes that an organisation's administrative overhead reduces over time, and how you compare to similar sized organisations. That might give you a clue as to whether your staff are using these technologies effectively. But other things are much harder to measure, because it's even hard to know they've happened. As I say, for every large change you do that saves £1 million, there will be 10,000 little things that save £1 million, and many of those you will never know about. So I think it's partially yes is the answer, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, right. Moving on. Any more questions?
None recorded, Chairman.
Okay. Right. So what we've done. Thank you for the presentation. Members have been invited to speak. Come to the end of that. The actions by the board are to review and comment on the function and recent activities of the IMT user engagement team, which Jackie and I have done. I propose that we receive the report. We've reviewed the function of recent activities. That's as far as we can go. We've noted the progress of highlighted projects commissioned through IMT. We've raised the question about unused potential. Right. Do we agree that that's what we've done? And if you don't agree and we could do more, then please express dissent in the chat room. Any dissent?
None at all, Chairman.
No. Thank you. Then the actions required by the board have been done. Thank you. That's agreed then. Thanks again. Okay. If we now move on to item 12, which is the establishment of the Legal Services Company, a progress report, David Coleman, the Chief Legal Officer, is going to present the report to us. Over to you for item 12, please, David.
Thank you. I've appeared at the bottom of the screen now. Thank you, Chairman. So this is an update on the development of the Legal Services Company, which was originally approved by executive in January 2020, having been considered by the OSMB in December 2019. I'm here essentially as a director of the company on behalf of my colleagues on the board, James Drury and Andrew Crookham, and Councillor Young is the County Council's owner representative in relation to the company. This report was originally timetabled to be brought in August of last year, and I'm grateful to the chairman and to the committee for their patience and for allowing me to put back the report more than once for the reasons that are set out in the report itself. The company was in fact formed on the 17th of March 2020, making today the company's first birthday, in fact. Unfortunately, almost as soon as the company had been created, it got overtaken by events, and as a result, wasn't really able to progress its application to the Solicitors Regulation Authority for a licence until the autumn, with the application going in on the 30th of October. And since then, we've been engaging with the SRA over that application, a level of engagement which has increased over the last few weeks to the extent that we now have a consolidated list of the questions that the SRA have about the application. We have responded to those questions and we're expecting their response to our response by Friday of this week. So we're seeing some progress around that, which we might have wished had gone a bit faster, but at least it's happening now. In the meantime, the company is taking steps that it needs to take internally to make sure that it can operate as a legal practice in compliance with the SRA's requirements. And there's a list of the decisions recently taken by the board on page 91 of the report. Given that it is the company's first birthday, there isn't a huge amount to celebrate, and it's been a disappointing and frustrating year, I think, for the directors in attempting to progress the agenda of the company. But I do detect an increased impetus, especially around the engagement and contact we're having with the SRA at the moment. And we're therefore currently looking at hopefully the 30th of April to be in a position to get a licence and to be in a position to start to operate the company in the way originally envisaged back in January 2020. So that's all I wanted to say, Chairman. Thank you. Happy to take questions.
Any questions?
None at all, Chairman.
Okay. Councillor Young, do you want to add anything?
Councillor Young was at another meeting. I don't know if he's back yet, Chairman.
Yes, I can see. Is there anything you want to say, Councillor Young? Gary? You're on mute.
Nothing to add to what David Coleman has said. Very concise and intelligible contribution. Thank you.
Okay, that's fine. So, if there are no questions, I've got one. The current estimate that we will be able to proceed will be before the 30th of April. Is there some indication that that process, which involves addressing the questions from the SRA, which has already been done, that the 30th of April is reasonable? I mean,
I think so. We have spoken to them, so we knew what questions were coming, and we knew, what lay behind the question, most importantly. So we understand the regulatory concern which they have and the extent of that concern. So we think we've been able to address their questions in a way in which they will be reassured by that. And we're reassured by the speed with which they've already acknowledged our response and indicated that they'll be coming back to us. So I don't think there's anything major there which they won't be able to comfortable with and then progress to their decision. We know, having spoken to them, that they have progressed their decision in the background. So a lot of the things that they need to check, they have checked and they're satisfied with. We know that they've begun to compile the evidence base for whatever their decision turns out to be. So I don't think there's going to be the kind of end to the questions and then a long wait while they go through their process. They've been running their decision-making process alongside the engagement we've been having with them.
Okay, so if it does come back by the 30th of April or whenever, then simply you're going to report that to us as members of OSMB, just simply by a note to all members of OSMB, just for information.
Yes, I can do that. And then I think we undertook to report to the committee, and maybe after 6 months of operation, we would come back and present a update report.
Yeah, so we don't simply need to have the paper back in order to agree anything. It's just information for noting, and then a review after 6 months.
Yeah. That's
lovely. Okay. Any more speakers, Councillor Wotton?
None at all, Chairman.
Okay. So, actions required. Thank you, David. That's reassuring anyway. Actions required. OSMB is invited to review the progress and provide feedback to steer future actions. Well, we're not providing any feedback to steer future actions because the ball is not in our court, but we expect to report with the outcome and then a review in 6 months. Okay, does that sound okay to everybody? If anybody doesn't agree, then please indicate dissent. Any dissent, Councillor Wotton, in the chat room?
Fully supported, Chairman.
Thank you very much indeed. Then that's agreed. Thank you, David, again.
Thank you.
Okay. So we move to item 13, COVID-19 update. We've got another one of those that's been recently circulated by Michelle Andrews. So over to you, Michelle.
Thank you, Chair. So I'll take you through the report. As you know, we've been coming on a monthly basis to give you an update, an overview of the activity that had taken place since the last report. And also just to point out that, as we said at the last meeting, the government's roadmap had been released just a couple of days before the last meeting. And so we do make another reference to that in order that we can locally look at how our approach will reflect those changes that were announced that we weren't able to put into the February report. So as discussed previously, I'll just take you through the latest data and the headlines on that and how that has compared to the information that was presented in February. So as you can see at the start of report there, that we have outlined the rate of positive cases per 100,000 population was in February on the 21st, 111.9 per 100,000 population. And as you can see, in comparison at the 14th of March 2021, it was reported at 85.7. So we have seen a drop in that rate. In addition, we've outlined the rate of COVID-19 cases reported in the latest 7-day period up to the 21st of February, and that was 852 at that point. And in comparison, the same figure reported on the 14th of March, which is now 652 at that point. So again, a 200 drop in the reported cases. What we then have reported is, again, the sad deaths that have been reported in the 7-day period up until the 21st of February, as defined by the national definition. That was reported at that point as 36 deaths. However, in the last 7 days up to the period of the 14th of March, it has reported that has now dropped, and that would be 14. However, that is obviously still a sad position to be in, but we are seeing that reduce significantly, which is a positive way forward. The final point, just to give you an overview, is the number of vaccines that have taken place and been administered. At the point of up to the 14th of February, Lincolnshire had administered 202,799 vaccines. And as of the 7th of March, this was reported at 304,850. So a significant increase, and as you'll note, that data does have a lag to it, but that's the most recent data that we have available. So again, the current position would be much higher than that. So we are going in the right direction. It is a positive direction of travel, but again, with the caution, we many people, including public health and national colleagues, are expressing their concern that obviously the potential impact of the wider opening of services as restrictions are eased over the next few months, that may impact on the volume of the infection rates as we see it, and that will be closely monitored. So below that, we have set out in much more detail at a local district level, so colleagues and councillors are able to reflect on that. And what we also have included this time was a reflection of the situation with Lincolnshire in regard to some of our neighbouring authorities. And as that's new for this report, although we do monitor that very closely across the partnership, it was requested that due to the concerns that opening of services may increase the volume of activity of people moving between authorities, that we wanted that information to be reflected. As people can see from the data provided, many areas, with the exception of one that surrounds Lincolnshire, are in the same trajectory as us with regard to a downward trajectory, with the exception of North Lincolnshire, which has seen a slight increase from 88.8 to 90.5 in the last 7-day period. So a slight increase there. Just to give councillors and colleagues some assurance that we are aware as the Lincolnshire Resilience Forum that the movement of people as restrictions ease is a concern, and the Warm and Inform cell and the communication colleagues are, including enforcement and compliance colleagues, are doing a lot of work making sure those messages are really clear about what is allowed and isn't allowed at those various points in time, in guidance with the local road, the national roadmap, to ensure that people are aware of the regulations, and where people are breaching those regulations, that enforcement is taking place either through our local authority, district colleagues where relevant, or our police enforcement actions where that's appropriate. So following that, we have then set out the activity that's occurred since the last report was made. As I've said, the media and communications are still very active, and making sure that social media and other communication channels are very much open. As we move into the next phase of the lockdown arrangements, the message is still in place of stay at home, and that will remain in place. But however, as from the 12th of April, as we know that the restrictions may ease depending on the data available at the time, and the government won't announce that until a week before that point. So that message then at that point will probably change to stay local. And again, we will need to kind of reinforce some of those messages to make sure people stay safe across the county and adhere to the appropriate guidance in place at the time. I've also set out the testing, and there has been significant changes in the testing of for COVID-19 in the last 4 weeks since the last report, and there's very much more greater focus now on community testing, and that's being encouraged for employees in the workplace who cannot work from home, but also there is a focus on teachers and secondary age pupils undertaking testing at home through a lateral flow test, and community collection points are being arranged across the county to assist with that, and that will be further developed over the coming weeks. As I said, the stage 1 of the national roadmap now has been implemented, and that was on the phase phase 1 of that, which was introduced on the 8th of March, which was the children of pupils of schools returning back to face-to-face learning. And as you can see, we've set out in the report that there has been a slight increase in the number of cases within school-based settings, and there are currently, at the point of writing the report, 50 schools that we had active cases of COVID-19 in the county. 29 of those have notified public health. So as we move there, the next point at which the changes take place will be the 29th of March. And as I said, we will get an announcement from the government a week before that point to see if that is the next phase will be implemented at that point. and that will be when changes take place about the meeting up in public of individuals. And what we've done in the report is set out our local plan. If you recall at the last meeting, we want to, in Lincolnshire, set about our recovery journey in 3 phases. Phase 1, the planning and preparation phase, which is where we are currently. Phase 2, the mobilisation and coordination phase. And the final phase of our recovery journey would be around oversight and assurance that the journey is positive and that provision has been put in place for all elements of the partnership to be well prepared and on that positive journey on a way forward. So we've set that out in a diagram there in line with the 4 steps that the government have set out. And we are looking at our move to a full recovery from a response phase would probably take place no earlier than June, when the restrictions are fully eased. But obviously that depends on the trajectory and the direction of travel over the next 2 months. And so we'll keep OSMB aware of that through the appropriate means. We then just outlined in the report, making sure people were familiar with our 3 key themes that we are looking at our recovery journey, which will be around economy and business, health and wellbeing and community and voluntary sector engagement, and outline our overarching strategic aim, which will be to identify vulnerabilities and address any inequalities that are found. The next step that we want to do with regard to planning and preparing for recovery in this period where we're running in parallel with our response colleagues is to set out our local roadmap. And what we've come to set out in the paper is describe the approach that we'd like to take and take feedback on that. If colleagues and councillors wish to contribute to that, we've provided this to OSMB and a range of other forums to make sure we do feel we've got representation across the wider partnership to have a whole Lincolnshire approach to this. So what we're looking to do is set out our journey for our healthcare, education, business and economy, community, the events management system, how we'll undertake compliance engagement and enforcement, and also how we'll look at our public sector finance over the next 12 months. The roadmap will really set out our high-level thoughts on the reasonably expected kind of scenarios for these areas, obviously understanding that there are possibly changes that will come over the coming months that we may need to revisit that. But it's what we feel is if we can have one collective roadmap for the county, then the direction of travel all partners will be able to engage in. So we've set out that, and I'm happy to take any comments or thoughts on how we can make sure that that's fully representative of everything that Lincolnshire feels we want to include. And in addition to that, just a brief note and acknowledgement of the National Day of Reflection, which will take place on the 23rd of March, as that will be the first anniversary on which the UK first went into lockdown. That's very much seen as a day to reflect and remember those that have died and been affected by the pandemic, and local arrangements are in place to ensure that we fully participate in that. And then also the final note of the report is really to pick up on the point at the last meeting of how councillors and OSMB members will be kept informed during April and May, when I believe the committee meetings will not be undertaken, and how we can ensure that in this fast-paced agenda we keep people engaged and councillors updated as to the progress around this agenda. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Another thorough report that brings us bang up to date and asks us questions about the future. Could I just ask the first one so that we can then share it with the answer? You can share the answer. You know the next steps piece about the roadmap and the local roadmap, really important. We'll set out from April 2021 to March 22 the reasonable expected scenarios. What sort of process are we going through? Are you looking now for contributions to that, or is a paper going to be written and then a request made for consultation on that? Which way round is it? Are you looking for feedback now, or is a paper going to be written and then feedback is going to be requested?
Okay, thank you, Chair. The way we're looking at it currently is we're working with colleagues from all of those sectors currently through the Strategic Coordination Group under the LRF, the Lincolnshire Resilience Forum. And all of those colleagues have been asked to work with their relevant organisations and partnerships and management groups in order to contribute to that. We will then collect that together and over the next 4 weeks look to put a document together which is representative of all of those areas. I think my ask of OSMB is, are those areas that I've stated there fully representative, or are there any others that OSMB would like me to work with in order that we can fully map out our priorities and strategic aims for that roadmap? Okay,
brilliant, fine. So putting this to the committee, Overview and Scrutiny Management Board rather, there it is, healthcare, education, business, community, events management. You can read it also, but also what arrangements are we going to make for getting reports back to us as OSMB when there's no meeting in April or May. So they're the two things. Anybody want to put forward any ideas, thoughts, or ask any questions to Michelle? Okay.
Question first. Michelle, since the lockdown started in March last year, there's been a real sharp increase in the amount of traffic, people also not obeying the law, stay at home. We have many of our residents who are still isolated at home, feel very scared to leave their home, and yet looking out on the 607 this morning, there was a great big traffic queue. Do you think the message stay at home has been diluted and now disappeared almost?
I think that's a fair reflection of the level of activity. We are continuing through the LRF to monitor the traffic volumes, and I have to say that police are taking action where they feel appropriate. My understanding was as of last week, the police had undertaken 1,022 enforcement actions during the last 12 months. So where there is clear evidence that people are breaking the law, enforcement action is being undertaken. However, we do feel in the next few weeks, the stay-at-home message does need to be fully communicated and actively through social media and other means to make sure that people are really clear what is allowed and not, particularly over the bank holiday weekends, as those dates do fall very near to that. And we are concerned that there will be levels of activity that actually are not compliant with the stay-at-home guidance over the bank holiday. So we will be doing much more media and communications out over the next 2 or 3 weeks to make sure people are fully aware of what is available. We are working with our East Lindsey colleagues as well to make sure that local message around staying safe and staying local as those restrictions ease. And we will do our very best to make sure that people have got that up-to-date information.
You mentioned earlier on policing. We had a online update last week on coronavirus assaults on Lincolnshire Police, and we were informed that 11 officers had either been spat off or hit, assaulted. Are you aware of any other key workers that have been subjected to abuse or assaults during this particular period?
I am aware that incidents have been reported in both the vaccination centres and also at the testing centres. And I have to say that the local councils, the police and health services have worked very quickly and very effectively to put additional measures in place so those staff feel appropriately supported and secure during undertaking their work. And the feedback this week was very positive about the additional measures, the security measures that have been put in place in response to some of those incidents. Debbie's put a camera on, so I'm not sure if Debbie wants to come in on that.
No, I just wasn't too sure if you were aware of that, Michelle, so I was just going to add to that, but that's covered it. Thank you.
Chairman, if I could just go back then, those assaults at the vaccination centres, what was the common factor behind them? Why were they doing it?
I mean, I think there's a couple of things that people are looking at. There had been some racial comments and sexual comments that people felt were inappropriate for that forum, and I know that police and health colleagues have taken action and contacted those individuals. And in addition to that, I believe there were some incidents where colleagues didn't feel comfortable coming into the building. Most incidents were reported. There was one or two where people had been in the building. There were some outside the building where people had turned up for appointments, but they weren't eligible for appointments. So it was kind of a customer service frustration in some of those instances that colleagues felt able to deal with. There was very isolated incidents actually within the centres, but as I say, security has been increased to support colleagues in those instances.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Chairman. I've got no further questions here, Chairman.
Thank you. Continuing the sort of line taken by Councillor Wotton, we all want people to observe the guidelines and rules that have been laid down, but they don't. And I'm just interested in enforcement and how Lincolnshire Police, relative to other, let's say, Shire counties, have been enforcing. And do we know anything about the numbers and whether they're proportionate to the responses in the rest of England, should we say?
As I said, we were reported as 1,022 enforcement actions had taken place in the last 12 months. I'm not able to confirm how that compares with other local authorities, areas, police areas at this moment in time, but I can follow that up and perhaps give some guidance on that at the next meeting.
Okay, fine, thank you. Any more, Ray?
None at all, Chairman.
Okay, a question then. And if we can't add to the next steps list of healthcare, education, business and economy, community, events management, compliance, engagement, public sector finance, then we're making that clear. Does anybody from OSMB want to add to that list as a potential sector for us to consider? Silence indicates nobody wants to add to that list. And the second thing you asked us, Michelle, was about reporting during the period from now onwards. So that's part of your report. So the next scrutiny committee isn't going to be held until June. And at the moment, the current agenda doesn't include any reference. Now, we can easily add to that in a moment when we come to that later on the agenda. And then there are a number of options, you're saying, which mirror the approaches that we've taken already. Providing briefing papers to members by email with an invitation to ask questions to officers. And I think that if it's not too much trouble, and I mean that seriously, then if you can update the report, I think that would be seriously welcome, and send it out at the time that the meeting would have taken place, which is essentially the end of April and end of May. And if there is going to be any formal decision taken where OSMB would have met normally and offered our contributions, then I think the suggestion of circulation by the scrutiny team to members of this OSMB, up to the point at which we are still members, bearing in mind there's an election on the 6th of May, and after that, I think it's a bit difficult to call, because the council doesn't meet until sometime in May to know who is a member of OSMB. So I think to an extent we might have to suck it and see in terms of that. But perhaps the group leaders, whoever are the group leaders, after the 6th of May, could come to a conclusion on that. How does that sound?
Chairman, I would support that, actually. I think it's very important especially as we're now entering the unlocking of the country, where cases may go either way. And I think we really need to keep a look on this.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Any other contributions anybody wants to make? Anything, Ray? Anybody putting in the chat room or indicating?
None at all.
Chairman.
Yes, certainly, Jackie.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Again, I've very much appreciated the amount of information that's been coming out, and I've noticed that a lot of the GP practices themselves have taken huge trouble to keep the information flowing on social media. Now, I think Councillor Wooden is right that when we come to June, that's going to be a crucial moment. I'm following a lot of these sites on the village forums and elsewhere, and people there is an element of the gung-ho starting to creep in. Oh, I can't wait to meet you. We're all going to go to the pub and things like this. Well, the disease hasn't gone away, so I would be very keen if Michelle is able to keep us updated. I'm slightly nervous about June, to be honest, and I think keeping a handle on it to see what the council's contribution is going to be significant. So I'm with you on that one.
Thank you. Okay. Anyone else? Okay. So that's all the speakers. The action required by the board are to consider the report. Thank you, Michelle, and provide feedback. I recommend that we receive the report and the feedback provided, and that the future updates should be in April and left to the group leaders to decide in relation to May. Okay, and it should go onto the agenda, I think, in June or July. Okay, is that agreed? If anybody wants to indicate to the contrary, can you do so in the chat room, please?
Fully supported, Chairman.
Thank you very much. That's agreed then, and thank you again, Michelle. We much appreciate the work that you do, and particularly reporting to us. But thanks.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Could we move then to item 14, the Property Services Contract 5-year report, which sets out the performance of how the property services contract with Vinci Facilities has gone at the end of the 5 years of the contract. Okay, so Stuart Wright, Contract Manager, to present the report. Over to you, Stuart.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I'm just going to run through the report covering year 5 and interim for year 6. So COVID-19 has presented challenges to the contract. We have been providing more deep cleaning to sites, and we've also assisted a partner organisation with robust cleaning provisions. 85% of statutory compliance activities have been completed, and but conversely, COVID-19 has adversely affected the catering provision at a couple of sites. Looking at page 2 under health and safety, the graph there shows an increase in the positive intervention trends, which is a positive, that's 99, and 58 to date for this financial year. Going on to page 3, finance. The contract incentivises the contractor with a target cost NEC-based contract. In year 5, there was a gain of £120,000. Conversely, there are also penalties within the contract, and these are in the form of low service damages. So we managed to recoup £38,650 in year 5. Going on to page 4 of the report, KPIs. So year 5 continues to be very good, with a reported KPI of 93.54% overall. Also on page 4, we touched on the Grenfell Tower tragedy and the Dame Judith Hackett report. So Corporate Property have proactively appointed a property compliance officer, and that was in January of 2021. And the compliance officer will be monitoring changes in legislation and also help minimise risks to Lincolnshire County Council. We've also been proactively working with VFPL on fire door inspections and looking at replacement and or repair of fire doors, but that will also require further investment, which is highlighted in the report. On page 5, we reported previously, prior OSMB, of the South Park campus, and that the construction has been completed on that. But we've also received very positive feedback from stakeholders regarding the facilities management mobilisation there. Also on page 5, touching on smarter working. So the transformation programme working towards smarter working, and the focus is using office space for collaborative activities for staff. There is a potential also to reduce the number of buildings that LCC use, which we are finalising over the next few months. Also touching on the hybrid way of working, utilising technology to enable staff to book workspace, and also the balance of working from home and working in the office. The VMost, so the new iteration we've finalised, and that now reflects LCC's corporate plan. And finally, on page 6, under continuous improvement, we've been using technology such as Power BI for management of statutory and reactive maintenance. And we've also insourced the commission air service from to VFBL from one of their subcontractors, because it was previously subcontracted out. So that should help improve the professionalism and effectiveness of that service. And that pretty much covers off the report. Thank you.
That's good. Really, really thank you. Thanks, Stuart. So, questions?
I've got none listed so far, Chairman.
Okay. So.
Oh yes, sorry, Chairman. I've got Councillor Rob Kendrick.
Okay, Rob.
Thanks, Chairman. I was just wondering. And obviously, you've got in the report the Quad restaurant closing due to the COVID situation. But I noticed it says that the collection cafe is closed indefinitely. That was run by an outside organisation, was it? I seem to recall, was it the people who run the Highbridge Cafe at one time were running it? I'm not quite sure what the situation is there. And I would assume once things get back to normal, somebody will be brought in or engaged to run it in some way. I just wanted a bit of clarification on that. Thanks, Chairman.
Yes, it was previously run by, there was another organisation, I forget the name of it, apologies, it escapes me at the moment. But yeah, we took it on within the contract, and it was run by a company called Elior for a period of time. But unfortunately, due to COVID-19, it didn't make it viable. There wasn't enough footfall going through the collection to make the cafe viable. But yet, yes, the intention is that we'll work with Heritage Services to look at a replacement in future when things start to get back to normal.
I think it's Stokes's, because they also run.
Yes, Stokes. That's the one.
Yeah. Okay. So that's that. Okay. The property element. It's often talked about that we have three big ingredients. One is property, the other is people, and the other is processes. The way we go about it. I'm just interested in the way that we're moving towards the idea of hybrid working, 2-3 or 3-2 working, and the impact that's having. I'd be interested if you could just tell us more about the way that officers and members are going to be, in a sense, expected to do different things in terms of property. I mean, what impact is it going to have, for example, on county offices, which is the building that members use most of all?
If I may pick that one up, Chair. Kevin Kendall.
Sure. Hello, Kevin. Welcome.
Hi. The Smarter Working Programme does include an office accommodation work stream, and part of that is looking to change the way we use buildings. So we're moving towards what's called a managed workspace model, which means that primarily bookable space, mainly in Lincoln. So we'll look at your book space for the task you need. County offices in particular, some of that will be bookable managed workspace. But areas like the members area, leadership hub, DEMP services and communications team will have hubs within the building which isn't bookable. So there'll be certain parts of the building out of scope, but the remainder of the building will be bookable space, either a mixture of meeting rooms or desks.
Okay, does that mean essentially that the members' areas are going to be left well alone?
That's correct.
That's okay, fine. Another question relates to the last page about insourcing of commissioner services, which says that the new service will provide a more efficient, reliable and professional service to the council. How did that come about? Was there dissatisfaction? In other words, insourcing will produce a better model. What was the problem?
I suppose it was a supplier, secondary supplier to Vinci, and I think the management control of Vinci over them wasn't as strong as it could be. And I think by having a direct employment by Vinci will give them greater control and also integration with other services Vinci have. So there are some efficiencies in that model whereby Vinci employ them directly. And certainly in terms of the managed workspace, it means we can employ them in a more proactive way in managing the workspace in the future. So it's more direct control, I think it gives Vinci in summary, and better customer care. Okay, thanks. Anybody else indicated to speak, Ray?
None at all, Chairman.
Okay, well, thank you, Stuart and Kevin. So we now have to consider the actions required by the board, seek assurance on the performance of the property services contract. We've had a report and we could have commented on it, provide feedback and challenge. Okay, we've been through that process. I therefore propose that the board receives the report and that we have been reassured on the performance of the property services contract for year 5. Okay, can anybody who disagrees with that proposal that I put to the committee board indicate in the chat room? Any indications of dissent, Ray?
None at all, Chair. Fully supported.
Okay, if that's the case, then that proposal has been agreed. Thank you again, Stuart and Kevin. Okay, if we now move on to the final item on the agenda, which is item 15, the Overview and Scrutiny Management Board work programme. For information only, no changes to report to these agencies, to these, what we've got before us. Could I just, in one sense, say that it may be appropriate for the future for the June meeting to include something about COVID, but that's some consideration outside of this meeting. Okay, so that's that concludes the business of the meeting. Thanks as usual for attendance. Can I again thank everybody who's been involved in OSMB over the last 4 years. Particularly, I want to thank those people that I or others might not see again, in the sense that they may well be retiring. I've mentioned before that we do try to work together collegiately, and I think that by and large over the 4 years it's been a success, and I think that we have held the executive and officers to account. I don't know what other people think, but I think that well, certainly that's my view. And I just wish everybody well for the future, whether or not they're a member of OSMB in the future. And thank you for the support that you've given to me personally and to Councillor Watson as well.
Chairman, may I thank you for being a good chairman over the past 4 years. It's been a really excellent meeting we've had over the time. We've scrutinised very well indeed, and I've enjoyed being with you on these meetings. I have Councillor Jackie Brockley who wants to speak as well.
Thank you, Councillor Brockway. Yeah, Jackie.
Thank you. I just want to echo Ray. Actually, I think it was very important that we should thank you for your efforts and for your work. You're a very inclusive chairman, and you run a very thoughtful and intelligent committee, actually. And I've learned a lot from you. So I think it's important that you should know that your efforts are appreciated. Thank you.
Yeah, that's kind of you. I appreciate both of the comments. I think it's been an easy job for me, relatively speaking, given the fact that I think everybody has worked constructively together in order to do the best things we can for the people of Lincolnshire. So, if there's no further comment, thank you, and I'll see some of you maybe in passing somewhere. Okay.